So for this video, I just wanted to clean up a couple of concepts that show up possibly in Pelkey handouts and so on, dealing with elimination reactions. And in particular, with a system like this, you may have noticed a problem, or at least a discrepancy, between a Miller handout and a Pelkey handout. With the idea being that here we have a alcohol serving as a leaving group in the presence of some acid and a Dean-Stark apparatus. This is going to be an E1 elimination reaction. The Pelkey handout claims that this will end up making largely a Zaitsev type product, whereas Miller handout has something closer to the lines that these reactions are unselective and will generally lead to a mixture of products. I would argue that those two statements are not in conflict with each other, but big picture, the Pelkey handout would like to stress that you'll predominantly make the Zaitsev product a more stable product, but the Miller handout will simply say you're going to make everything. So don't assume that this reaction will be relatively well behaved. Where this begins, of course, mechanistically, is that first you must protonate the oxygen to make a better leaving group. Once the oxygen has been converted into water, which is a better leaving group, then it can simply leave on its own. The result of water leaving is to form a secondary cation, and many different things can happen to the secondary cation. First and foremost, the Zaitsev product can be formed at this stage, with water attacking to eliminate and lead to the more stable product. This material is going to be in the trans configuration because that will be the more stable of all possible products. So the Zaitsev product would be formed the trans internal disubstituted double bond. The other possibility here, of course, is that you're going to form at least some of the Hofmann product, and that's because the water might attack on the other side. And again, the Miller handout would claim that you're going to get a mixture of both. This is a relatively unselective reaction. This particular cation is really unstable right now, and removing a nearby proton will lead to a better outcome. And so, though you're going to predominantly form the Zaitsev product, you might very well form some Hofmann product along the way. Don't assume that this reaction will be particularly selective. This being, of course, the Hofmann product. There is one more path, that we now have a secondary carbocation, and we have nearby hydrogens that could shift over. And though this would only lead to another secondary cation, it would be a secondary cation with resonance. So if we now have this secondary cation with resonance, and the water comes by and deprotonates the hydrogen, that then leads to your Zaitsev product. So why did I take the time to draw this structure? Well, largely because you will form a more stable cation if you can. This rearrangement takes place because you go from a secondary to a secondary with resonance. We know that the molecule is trying to find the lowest energy possible system. That's why rearrangements happen. And so with an E1 elimination, the molecule is trying to find its way to the lowest energy sink wherever possible, which is why there's a tendency toward the Zaitsev. On the other hand, this cation is not stable at the moment, and anything that will lower its energy, including the water deprotonating in the wrong place, if you will, to lead to the Hofmann product, that will happen as well. This molecule is simply trying to get to a better energy state. It will do so both favoring the predominant product being the more stable Zaitsev one, but also it will do some other paths as well. And once you have done the elimination, you're not likely to go back. So both Pelkey and Miller are saying the same thing. This is going to find the lowest energy possible product, but it's not necessarily going to be selective along the way. It will make a mess. Predominantly in Pelkey handouts is that you can have amine cations serve as a leaving group, what he calls an Ammonium ion. You can look at this as having a neutral leaving group. If this were to leave, it would leave as N-methyl-3 with a pair of electrons on it. Therefore, this is a relatively stable leaving group. On the other hand, this is not a particularly good leaving group. This is something that won't happen on its own. You won't get any SN1 or E1 elimination type products. However, it is possible in the presence of strong base, especially with heat, to do elimination product. Now we again have a choice between Hofmann type eliminations and Zaitsev type eliminations. We could head toward the Zaitsev by having the hydroxide remove this particular proton, and you will probably get some of this product. It just won't be very much of it, and largely that's because this is a huge leaving group. It is relatively hindered, and so even though we have a very small base, the molecule as a whole is relatively hindered, and so it's relatively hard to get access to the hydrogen that must be taken in order to give you the Zaitsev product. In other words, though you will probably form some of this Zaitsev product, it won't be the predominant product. No, the more likely outcome here is that the hydroxide simply abstracts the hydrogens out here to give you a Hofmann-style product. When you're doing an amine cation as the leaving group, it is far more likely to give you Hofmann products than it is to give you Zaitsev products.